and invite my friend in, Eric Swanson. So, Eric, hey, thanks for
Hey,
joining us.
what a phenomenal group of guests you've had already.
Yeah, hey, thanks for joining us. Have you been able to keep up with much of what's happening? How
All of
much
it.
have you watched? All of
All of
it.
it. Yeah.
Wow. So,
And not to say that I haven't been doing my email and stuff like that.
just
But
keep me
listen
playing
to
in the background, man. That's
it.
awesome.
This is so
We're just here
exciting.
to entertain. No, I'm
Yeah.
excited. So, what's been a takeaway? Just have you been listening, or what's been your thoughts so far?
You've had a tremendous amount of guests here. One of the things that I think of, and um, what I'll say is that tools never make the unwilling willing, but tools do make the willing able. And when I was at Tariq early on, yeah, Tariq,
Yes.
in Pakistan, because he has the heart to share the gospel with people from his homeland for the first time in history, he has the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think what technology does, it doesn't um, it helps those that God has tapped on the shoulders to do things they've never been able to do before. And to miss this opportunity, I think you and I have talked about the history of communication, but Christians have always kind of been on the forefront of taking advantage of the new communication. The Christians were called the people of the book, and we like to spiritualize that and think, well, that's because they were committed to the scriptures. No, they were the people of the book because the first codex, the first book, was invented in about 100 AD. And the,
Hmm.
the advantage of a book over a scroll was that you could write on both sides. It was portable. It was searchable, rather than kind of going through the whole scroll. Where's that passage again? They could actually turn pages and things like that. And then the printing press, just it's what really spread the gospel in those days. And some of your guests have mentioned even Billy Graham's adoption of radio. And every
Yeah.
new technology, it's sort of like, well, this isn't the real thing. Radio is not the same as in person.
Yeah.
But you think of all the millions of people that came to Christ through watching even the Billy Graham crusades on TV. Um, and you and I both know the story of Walt Wilson, who started global media outreach. The first time he saw the internet, he said, how can we use this to to reach people with the gospel? And today they've reached, you know, even if you cut the statistics by a tenth, it's an unbelievable outreach because it really matches people who are searching for God with reliable information that they get to take that next step closer to Him. Those that want to grow in their relationship, that's just amazing. So
So good.
it's just amazing. Jesus film. Just all the things that technology has advanced, and even listening to your conversations. Is it isn't it interesting that we think that in person's best, but if that's true, why did Jesus say it's actually better for you that I go away?
Yes. Oh my
You know,
gosh.
you know, it's so,
That's
so
such a good statement.
well, it really is. And it's everything's not better in person. I think there's some things that can be better in person
Sure.
that digital can't do, but some things in digital that, that, uh, that in person can't do. I just printed out a couple things. Oh, because I know you're going to ask me this question at the end, but I need more time to talk about this stuff because this stuff kind of exciting to me. So, in other words,
What?
can the church grow without a building? So, if you look at, I just wrote down some data here, but the first church beginning in 30 AD had 70 people maybe. By 60, it was between, this is all off of good data, 1,000 to 1,500. But by the year 300 AD, the first church building was built in the year 303. So in the first 300 years, the church grew between 2.5 million and 3.5 million. 10% of the Roman population was Christianized without ever having a church building.
Wow.
That's our standard. So if you think, well, it's not genuine church. Well, how did the most um, mathematically high growth happen in the history of the church it didn't happen in a building. Um, just let's see what else I got. I got a couple other good gems for you here for us to think about for those that are on the podcast. But it's kind of the question I just wrote down. What can we do online that we can't do in person better, and what can we do in person better that we can't do online,
Yeah.
right? And so that'd be one of the things. So I created this little chart, just a little hybrid chart there. But
Venn diagram.
a little Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to line up the camera. Best of analog, best phone. What's the best combo phone? Let me just see before we go into open force. Oh, I made a list of all the one another's.
Yes.
So there's about 34 one another's, and I checked off which ones you couldn't do. What is it? I'm a little off. That's why. Here
Yeah, go more in the middle.
we go.
Which ones you can't do? Like, just read
Yeah.
for me. Read some of that to me.
Here's what they are. So accept one another.
Yeah, you can do
Online,
that digitally.
be at peace with one another. Be
Yeah.
devoted to one another in love.
Yeah.
Be hospitable to one another. I said probably physical only, maybe. But you can be hospitable online too. You are, Jeff. Today you're being very hospitable.
Yeah. Oh, thank
Be
you.
kind, tenderhearted, and forgiving one another.
Sure.
You don't have to be in person to do that. Be the same mind with one another. Be subject to one another. Bear one another's burdens. Clothe yourself with humility towards one another. Confess your sins to one another. Encourage and build up one another. Gently and patiently tolerate one another. Greet one another with a kiss.
Yeah, I'm not kissing you either physically or digitally, but yeah, I could see that being a challenge.
That's a challenge. And then, uh, oh, this is a good one, Jeff. Husbands and wives, don't deprive one another physically. So, can't do that. So the total score, so maybe 3 out of the 34, wash one another's feet, wait for one another before beginning the Eucharist, through love, serve one another, stimulate one another, loving good deeds, et cetera, et cetera. They can all be done online as well.
Yeah.
So
That's really
yeah.
interesting. Where do you pull? I'm just curious because I know it's different sources. Where do you pull that list from for the
You
one
know, I did
another's?
I did I think I probably just back in the day I Googled it. I think, a couple years ago, Jeff, didn't I bring you into a group I was working with Digital Church in Australia?
Yeah, well, I did. I spoke at that. You wanted me
Yeah.
to when you invited me in. You were like, Jeff, talk crazy, and I talked crazy and blew some heads. Like it was a lot of fun.
No, it was totally a lot of fun. And so in preparation for that, I looked at, I did a lot of study of it because there's so much resistance to the new thing. And yet God is always about the new thing.
Hmm.
Don't bring to mind things of the past, for behold, I'm doing something new. And if we can kind of see this as a great moment in history, and by the way, I think so I counted them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 kind of real big communication shifts in the world, from tablets to scrolls, scrolls to the books, books to printing press, telegraph, telephone, radio, TV,
Hmm.
cell phones, blah, blah, blah. And right now, I think we're at the beginning of another one with all the stuff on AI.
Hmm.
And I know you want to talk a little bit about that today, but it's just we need to be in the forerunners. Remember how I just said earlier that tools don't make the unwilling willing, but they
Yeah.
do make the willing able. And just an example of that, which kind of spills over into digital, a year and a half ago, my grandson, he's 11 years old, and he went to his first church camp. I said, "Well, Lincoln, what'd you learn?" And he's saying this, that, and the other thing. I said, "Well, did you do any Bible study?" He said, "A little bit." And they told me, I had a good memory, so he told me the 3 passages that he looked at. And his dad said, "Hey, Lincoln was thinking about maybe wanting to do a little Bible study with you and I, after church on Sunday. We go to different churches, and just maybe pick up some burgers and we'll come over there." And I think I said, "That's a good idea." I said, "I'd love to do it." I said, "But I want to do it a little differently." And he said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well," he said, "you remember 90% of what you teach, but about 5% of what you hear. So why don't we just introduce Lincoln to ChatGPT, and the passage we're going to read, then he can just ask ChatGPT for some discussion and application questions." So it's 20
Hmm.
minutes. And so the first Bible study that Lincoln was in as 11-year-old, or as a 11-year-old, he led his dad and his grandfather in Bible study,
That's awesome.
right? And so what happens is, so he was willing to do it, and that tool, for the first time in
Yes.
history, gave him the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is there are lots and lots of people, and this is what, if you followed global media outreach, all the digital stuff. I mean, they've got people with cerebral palsy that can't hardly speak at all, but are typing messages out, audibly or things like that. And God has released their passion
Hmm.
to champion the spiritual growth of another person through this wonderful technology.
Yeah.
And technology never makes the unwilling willing, but if you want to be an evangelist around the world, you can do that right now today.
Yeah.
If you want to lead church, if you want to contribute to church, you can do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I've been
So good.
blabbing a lot.
Man, we
Um,
haven't even formally introduced you yet. Eric Swanson.
I was the late guy. I'm the late guy. That's
Yeah,
all
you
you have
you
to
you
say.
jumped in, hit the ground running, and I've got a open slot here a little bit. So time wise, I'm okay to go. Do you have any to keep going? Are you okay time
I,
wise?
yeah, I can go. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Eric Swanson is, I would call him a supporter of the Church Digital. I think Eric Swanson was the first person to donate to the Giving Tuesday campaign, and just that just happened to be that way. I saw the gift come in, but Eric, and aside from some of the financial aspects, like he's been one of these people within the church industry. I'm using the word gently, but that's just really been an encourager or supporter. Um, I can remember even like we were texting each other. We were in Lausanne, Congress, Seoul. 5,000 6,000 people at this Congress from like 161 countries, whatever it was, and 20 some thousand people watching online. It was this massive thing. I never actually saw Eric, but we were encouraging and keeping up via text. But Eric, like, tell us a little bit, just even background. Like, what do you do now? What's your scope
My
of life
background,
look
I
like?
came to Christ, a college student at Cal Berkeley back in the day, and had a 25-year run with Campus Crusade, now called Cru, in their campus ministry. So I've always kind of, since I came to Christ through personal evangelism, I've been kind of committed to that. And the last couple decades, I worked with a leadership network before. During the pandemic, um, they transferred their ownership over to Exponential, but I had a good 20 years with them, where the leadership network model was always taking innovation that was happening on the edges and helping it become the new norm. So I work in the area of externally focused churches, on city transformation, on global missions, on marriage ministry, a whole bunch of other things. But in the process, you meet a bunch of very bright people, and if you pay attention, you can learn a lot from very smart people like you, Jeff,
Yeah.
and new ways of doing things. And it's always, tended to work with those innovators and early adopters that have to prove the model works before anybody else is going to adopt it, and that works.
Yeah,
But
there's
and,
there's a saying we say a lot here at the Church Digital: pioneers get shot, settlers get rich, and so a lot of us are kind of at that.
why do you have to be a pioneer, Jeff? Why
Yeah,
can't you?
man, it's we're literally like with the people on the deserted island with the machete cutting down the palm trees, paving the way
Yeah,
for somebody else to come along. But I mean, really, that's what we're trying to do is to establish a healthy model for this, and celebrate that model so the next generation can come along. My son's 14, my daughter's 16. They're on this device, love it or hate it. They're on this device a
yeah,
ton. And it's not just, texting's one thing, but they're into Roblox, excuse me, they're into Minecraft, they're into Final Fantasy, Discord, this is their community. And
yeah,
so starting to utilize the community of this, the future generations we're just doing the road now for the next generations to tap in.
yeah. And if you think that digital can't be real, I just printed off one of the slides that I've given before, but this is from a couple years ago. But 36% of kids between 12 and 17 have been targeted for bullying online.
Yeah.
68%, no, I'm sorry, 68% of children have had one or more harassments online, leading to a mental health issue. And so to say that it's not real, it can't affect people, their emotions, their actions, it's just naive,
Yeah,
you know? Um,
that's
yeah.
good.
So in
Um,
some way, so it fast forwards the future too. Acts 1:8, you will be my witnesses through digital. You are my witnesses in
mhm.
Judea, Samaria, Judea, Samaria, the most part of the earth. So
I love that.
go ahead.
So
You had a
you're
question.
like, you're not a young guy. No offense. I mean, I'm not young either, but you got me by a decade or so. It's unusual to see an older generation person with this mindset. Like, how did you get to that point? What was the turn digitally? What was the turning point for you start to understand some of this in a different light?
That's a good question, but I'm not a traditionalist in the sense that I can close a chapter on a phase of my life, whether it's moving to a new house or downsizing to a condo or upscaling again to another house or moving to a different part of the country. So I'm able to close that door, but I kind of look for what, like, I really like history.
Mm-hmm.
I read history, but that's not where the future's found. And probably in the digital space, it was with meeting with Walt Wilson, who started the global media outreach, that he was his the light bulb that turned on for him, sort of like, well, of course. And so even with AI, seeing that as maybe the great thing about AI is that we're at the very beginning of a new communication revolution, and that can give abilities to people that they've never had before to make an
Mm,
influence in someone else's life for the gospel. And whether it's it, and you can customize experiences towards persons, towards people. And I think we're at the beginning of that. And what we do need is the brightest minds of the faith to kind of think digital, to think how can this assist me. There's a great verse in where is it? But God says, He said, it is I who formed the blacksmith, who forges the tools for their use. And that's where when you kind of see that God is behind all these technologies, that God that behind these inventors, they may not even know they're
yeah.
being used by God. But when some breakthrough comes through, like digital or AI or some video stuff, or the smartphone, where most of the world
Yeah.
carries a device with them, that's to advance His purposes.
Yeah.
If we can see it that way, rather than, oh, this is the mark of the beast, or this is something that's detrimental to the gospel, people
Yeah.
are going to stop meeting in person. Um, and what happened for churches is that many of them were forced into the revolution. I was just looking at some research. I think 2% of churches before the pandemic, 2% of churches had digital presence, or were making that an emphasis. And during the pandemic, to survive, everyone had to,
Yeah.
and it caused us to kind of to find out ways. In the one of the unintended laws of unintended consequences was, before the pandemic, pastors would tell their people, you can't survive without coming to church. You need to you not forsake the assemblies together, lest you fall away. Da, 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 da. And the pandemic kind of showed that there's a little hole in that argument.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people that didn't go to church for months and months, they looked at themselves and said, I just get just much offline online, than I did in person. And so that's why I think, one of your guests mentioned earlier that most churches of any substance do have a digital presence today, you know, to
Yeah.
minister.
If to the point, like, if God is not in this device, if God is not, somebody's told me God is not in virtual reality. Satan owns virtual reality. If that is true, if man has created a device that blocks God out, like theologically, that's a nightmare. Like
Right.
we have essentially created realms that God is not a part of, and I don't believe like if we believe that, there's so much of our theology that just falls apart. Like God has to be
Yeah.
in these spaces, and God has to use it in that space. I mean, not to mention we see so much of it. It's funny. I've got Alice in the Palace is over here hanging out, and she is very active. She's one of these people that found Christ in virtual reality in here. Flat Cap, is a streamer that's in here a lot, and he's constantly working in with Twitch and engaging in that platform and seeing God move and building relationships for the kingdom. Like God has to be in that space. We're seeing so much of him not to be. The idea of what you said, you blew my mind. Um, if physical is so important, why did Jesus have to leave? Why was
Well, he
it
said
better?
better than I
Why
go
was it
away.
better? Yeah, that was man. I gotta sleep on that one. That was a tattoo worthy moment. That's the second tattoo worthy moment of the stream here. So thank you for that. Hey, let me ask some basic questions for you. We're
Yeah.
asking everybody this. You've seen the stream, standard question up here. Can missions be digital? What's your take?
Yeah. Just, I mean, I think I blabbed about that enough, but it's not, can it be? It already is.
It already is.
So we're doing, hey, is this missions right now, Jeff?
I hope so.
Yeah. And it's all digital.
Yeah.
You didn't have a conference. We're doing this. You got a, what 12 hour, 12 hours guess. By the way, when's your bathroom breaks? Or are you
I've
wearing a
got some.
stadium
Actually,
suit?
you know what? I'm in the middle of a bathroom break right now. Well, Andy Mage was supposed to cover me and do the next guest, and he got really sick last night. And so, I my bio break is on hold for a little bit, but I've got some breaks later in the afternoon, so I'll get some lunch. Thanks for asking, though, awkwardly on the stream. I appreciate that. Simon's in the waiting room, and I'll bring Simon on.
Everyone is thinking, Jeff.
Yeah. I'm sure. I'm not drinking any more coffee. Let's just say it that way. I'm probably good for a little bit. Next question I want to ask is, and the standard question again: can the church exist digitally?
Yeah, I just think, again, um, going back to the first 300 years, the greatest growth we've seen was without a physical permanent space to gather. Um, and what happens, you get hints too of what the world kind of God wants to what. You think of even in Acts when the church was gathered and people from every nation were there and, and heard people speaking the gospel in their own language. It's almost like a forerunner or of a hint of something that God wants to do that if people can hear the message in their language in their context, it's going to be more effective than hearing it in a foreign way to do it. And so, what digital allows us to do today is to do that. That's one of the things. Maybe that's not directly answering your question, but it's a question that I had for an answer that I had for a question you didn't ask me. But of course, Jeff, yeah. I mean, it's not can it is. And I think what happens is every form of church, and they're all different around the world in physical spaces. If you were to go to Pakistan to the church there,
Mm-hmm.
I was with an Uber driver a few months ago, and she said that she and her husband planted 60 churches in Pakistan for missionaries over there. But that's going
Wow.
to look a lot different. My son's was a missionary in China for many years, and the church they were planting there are very different than what you'd expect
Yeah.
here. And so, being digital is simply one of those expressions of the variety and the complexity and the diversity of the churches that God uses to advance His mission of growth and life that comes through the gospel. So,
Yeah. So good, man. I've appreciated your time. I've appreciated your relationship. We've had many conversations digitally and physically over the years, and your emotional support for me, your financial support with the Church Digital is very supportive. Maybe very helpful. Maybe as a last question I want to ask you. Um, why should someone support the Church Digital?
Because the pioneers, every new invention, you look at the what was the thing that Apple had where you had a little tab? It preceded the smartphone,
The
um,
Newton.
the Newton. Yeah, that took arrows to the back. But without the Newton, the smartphone would not have been invented.
Yep.
And what happens is, as a pioneer, Jeff, you're like a scientist. You're running mad experiments all the time in the hope of a breakthrough drug that has not sold one dime yet and not sold one penny's worth of stuff. It's not cured one person. But as a pioneer, we need to invest in the R&D of things like what you are doing in equipping those that want to advance the gospel. If they're content with church the way it is, this you're not for them. You're sort of like, oh, well, this is a substitute for what the real thing is. But I think the more when we look at our kids, and particularly when I look at my grandkids, their space is digital.
Yeah.
They're probably more time on their screen than they are face to face with any of their friends. And so the common way of communication and growth and input and helping others, your hypothesis is it's going to be increasingly online and the church better be there. And so, if I just think, that you're supporting people that are supporting you, they're really supporting an R&D, research and development for the greater church. And the finances allow you to get your message out to a broader group of people to help them run experiments. And by the way, one more thing to share is that, which is kind of revealing. This is interesting. But before I'd convene these groups with Leadership Network, because we did one on digital ministry, I sent out a letter to all the churches that were going to come and be in the room like a month later. And I said, hey, I saw you online. I really love what you're doing. How can I get more engaged? I live here, but man, I love what you're doing there in Cincinnati. Well, how can I get more involved? Out of the 21 letters that I sent, emails that I sent, some by the way didn't even have a way to contact them. Some churches didn't have a way to contact them. But of the 21 churches that I'd sent that to, I got response back from only 8 churches.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is, to me that's the problem, because I'm raising my hand saying, how can I take my next step with God and the church? And I write to them, I initiate with them, and they were unwilling to get back to me. Even
Yeah.
like, hey, we really haven't got anything for you. But imagine that. So we got a whole lot of work to do, Jeff. And I'm hoping you can kind of help solve that anybody that asks at least gets some type of response, that somebody's
Yeah.
listening.
No, I love that. Eric Swanson, perennial supporter of the Church Digital. Eric, thanks for
Hey,
jumping.
I'm gonna make another donation after I get off this thing too, Jeff.
Awesome. Love that.
It's,
I've got
it's
Mindy.
okay.
Mindy Caliguire is coming on, our mutual friend there. So she'll be on later today. But Eric, thanks for jumping on.
You bet, Jeff.
Appreciate it. You have a
Yeah,
great
really
day.
fun. Okay, bye bye.
Thank you, sir.